Hey everyone, and welcome back to episode 7 of the YoJoeShow Podcast. Hey Joe,
Hey, yo, how's it going?
I'm awake and alive. I think we've got a lot of very interesting things to discuss.
Yep, I'm doing okay. My heart's beating, lungs are working. I know not to complain too much. If not for those two things, the rest just wouldn't matter.
What's first up on our docket?
So, first up, I think we're going to be talking a little bit about one of my favorite topics, which has to do with the state of our healthcare, health, wellness, nutrition, drug companies. These are all topics that you know are near and dear to my heart. And the very first one actually involves some interesting news. Many people may not be aware, but much of the decision making in government regarding our health and our food systems are made by different committees and groups that often have people that are sitting on those groups and committees that are part of the actual industry. So they're industry insiders who are actually going and essentially agreeing to the things that they want to agree to. That would be the danger, right?
Or
There's some
advising
changes.
the government on things that they have personal biases and motivations for.
Right. Ultimately, you don't want the criminals, so to speak, using that term loosely,
Running the asylum.
running the police department or the institutionalized running the institution, so to speak. So it's encouraging. We'll see where things go. We do have a clip that kind of explains a little bit. This is on the Megyn Kelly show, where there's the dichotomy of this, right? So government wants to work with these different industries and wants to work with the different companies, but can't allow and shouldn't allow. In fact, it's somewhat surprising and concerning that this has been going on for all this time, where we have decisions being made, let's say, by people that are insiders to the companies they're deciding things about. So let's play that.
We have to do two things. Number one is we have to partner with industry and pharma to facilitate the process to make it user-friendly and expeditious. We shouldn't be in a receive-only mode. We want American pharma companies to do well and companies that do business in the United States to do well. But the scientific evaluation needs to be independent. And that's why today we're announcing we are removing industry members, pharma members from FDA advisory committees. I was shocked when I learned that employees of big pharma companies sit on FDA advisory committees as members of those committees. So we're going to be replacing them whenever statutorily possible with patients and family caregivers. We are going to be inviting pharma companies to send representatives to the advisory committees, but they can sit with the rest of the public and watch and pose questions as the rest of the American public can.
I think this is very exciting news, and it is somewhat of a transition from what is ridiculous policy that's been going on for many decades, where the drug manufacturers can send representatives, where the food manufacturers can send representatives to determine what is healthy and what is not, what is advisable and what is not. I think most people by now hopefully know that the food pyramid should literally be upside down or almost be upside down. So the advice that they've been giving us for a very long time hasn't been sane advice. We've seen this especially during COVID. So this does seem like a very decent development, especially when instead of having these corrupt company representatives on the board, we'll have families and patients, families of patients instead. It seems like it may be a very kind of moment of taking the power away from the elite and giving it back to the people. At least that's something that comes across to me. And I think that is a good development, yet it is still astonishing how long this has gone on and how this was the situation in the first place. Like we see when Boeing for the FAA kind of does their own inspections and their own investigations, doors start flying off of Boeings and engines stop working, and that can cause the death of many people. So one of the very few tasks that governments do have, aside from like internal and external security, is preserving courts and legal systems and then monitoring that those rules are implemented. And if you allow the companies to monitor themselves, then there's really no monitoring happening. And that's what we've seen across all of the bureaucracy. It's like one of the core duties of the government. And instead they claim that they didn't have enough funds, even though their budgets are tens of billions of dollars large, but they still do not have enough funds to have enough inspectors and have enough regulators to regulate whether it's the food companies or the drug companies or the airline or the aircraft manufacturing companies. It's just absurd. Like, where is the budget all going to, and the budget is all going to administrative costs, which is just bureaucrats being bureaucrats who do nothing valuable, right? So instead of them doing their core responsibility, they've basically outsourced that, even if at the cost of American lives. And that's very sad to see, but exciting to see that has finally changed.
And time will tell, right, as always, but certainly that it's being discussed and being brought to light so that everybody understands that we have this sort of situation. And you give an example. It's not just that's certainly without question outside just the medical field. So it's not just big pharma, the drug companies. It's not just the food industry. We actually have essentially a widespread concern that when decisions are being made about what should and shouldn't be done, that this should be an unbiased decision that's being made for the benefit of the constituency of the people that live here in the United States. One of the things we often, as of late, have been discussing and bringing up has to be the mind-boggling, concerning drug ads and some of the disclosures that are put in the fine print. And I have
rumor has it you have a few more of those for us, huh?
I do. And the examples are tie in exactly as to why it's important that, because we asked ourselves before, how could this even be legal that they're allowing some of these ads to run? You would think there should be no level of trickery, deception, or sleight of hand in medical and pharmaceutical advertising. Maybe this is perhaps why there's some concerns. Here's one example. And we've brought up several last episode, I believe, and then there's this one. This is a beautiful diagram that they put here. I think it's very perhaps distracting. It seems very official looking. It helps people understand where the lower back, the lumbar spine is, where the hip or the total hip is, and then the femoral head, the top of the femur, the leg bone, connecting in to make the connection to the hip. Great. You look at that and go, wow, it's very educational. It says the drug called Evenity significantly
Results in 12 months, significantly increased bone mineral density in the lumbar spine, total hip, and femoral neck at 12 months versus placebo. And then there is a little star. So if we go ahead and we try
let's not look at the star yet. Let's look at the things that are most obvious first. Most obvious is, so what is it basically telling us on the opening
over 12
statement?
months, it increases the bone density, which is assumed to be a very good thing.
Right. And remember, people are taking this drug because they're concerned about having fractures, having a broken hip, for example, right? Fractures in their bones. And these type of drugs are intended to reduce the likelihood that you're going to have. Typically, you're given these when they're concerned you're imminently going to have a fracture or you've had one and you don't want to keep having them. So that's the premise. It seems like compared to placebo, which is the non-active drug that's given to the person that's just basically like a sugar pill, as you'd call it, there is a difference, it says. Significant increase in bone mineral density. Okay. Then it says in a study, what does it say at the bottom?
In a study that followed over 7,000 women with postmenopausal osteoporosis receiving Evenity, which is the drug being advertised, or placebo, a treatment without medicine, for 12 months, women on Evenity experienced a significant increase in the bone mineral density, BMD, of their lumbar spine, total hip, and femoral neck compared to women on placebo. So this basically is just a repeat of what we saw earlier. But then you pointed out something that I basically missed.
Right. And why did we miss it? Tell me what's unique about that writing that's next to the little asterisk that's on the picture.
Yeah, so typically when you see an asterisk in the main text, it is referring back to the bottom of the poster, to the kind of small text at the bottom. And that's what we just read, which is almost a repeat of the main text. So that's a little ironic. And there's a line that is very easy to miss. It is like very light blue on a light blue background. And I really have to bring the laptop up to see. And it says BMD results do not imply fracture risk reduction. So this is a drug being promoted, being sold to reduce the risk of fractures of broken bones. And then it gives you this whole spiel about how amazing this drug is at improving bone density. But then in the tiny letters on the light blue, it basically says there's no evidence that improving bone density will help reduce fractures. So then why are you selling us this drug?
So that's an important consideration. So a lot of individuals, especially as they advance in age, will be asked to take a scan, a DEXA scan, a bone density scan. And when they do that, it does provide information as to how dense or thick the bones are. The concern is that doesn't always have a direct straight line to a reduction in the chances of getting fractures, because some of what appears denser in the bones actually is a framework that's not as strong as what you'd want. And that's why legally they're putting this disclosure saying, yeah, this medication will increase the density or thickness of your bones. However, I'm sure their attorney said, you have to disclose somewhere, maybe very small print with light blue on light blue background, or that's the way it seems, that just because it does do that to your bones, that may not prevent actual other fractures. Specifically, does not imply fracture risk reduction. So again, this is taken off an ad that you would typically see on television or maybe on social media, and it's flashes up on the screen for a period of time. There's also print ads that are like this, which again, even in print, as you can see, it's very difficult to even read what it says. You have to hunt after you read it, you have to understand what that even means, because a lot of patients might not really even know that what the importance of that statement is. So you would think that just because of the potential confusion or misunderstanding, that should be enough to perhaps say that advertising like this would need to be cleaned up a bit before it was published. And we'd wonder, how is it that there are ads like this? And again, not to knock this one drug or drug manufacturer, because as we've already discussed previously, but we're going to look at some more examples, this is a common tactic, if we call it that. It's certainly, again, I understand that's a good way to market. You don't want to scare people, but if you have something that, if you're going to buy a car and the wheels fall off, you may want to mention that there's a potential for the wheels falling off. That's really my concern with some of these things, is that it doesn't provide, I think, a clear enough notice to the potential consumer, which is the patient, of the ins and outs of what they're taking. Here's another one.
Yeah, just about that last one, the ironic thing is at the bottom it says that while taking Evenity, you also need to take vitamin D and calcium.
Right.
Now, we know that calcium, it helps with bone density, and we were like, I'm no doctor or anything, but just curious. Maybe if you take a whole lot of vitamin D and calcium and maybe do a little bit more sport and eat a little bit more healthy, you won't need Evenity in the first place. And you won't have to deal with all the side effects that are extremely likely come with these drugs. So yeah, this is another drug for Kisqali, and it says live longer, which is a very motivational little slogan. It can almost be Nike's new slogan, I think. And then on the bottom, it says in postmenopausal woman at a 26-month check-in, median time to worsening of at least 10% in quality of life score was 27.7 months with Kisqali plus letrozole versus 27.6 months with placebo plus letrozole. First of all, this quality of life score, that sounds something that's very easy to play with and mesh with. And then the difference between 27.7 and 27.6, well, regardless of if you take this Kisqali, you have to take another drug called letrozole. Maybe letrozole is doing most of the heavy working. I don't know, but it's 0.1% of a difference. And the headline is live longer. That is just utterly ridiculous.
So if you think about it, it's 0.1 month difference. So if a month's 30 days, which depends on the month, but let's just keep it simple, you're talking 3 days. So we're basically saying that the difference is about 3 days. And this has to do with, again, quality of life, but also specifically the claim is how long you're going to live. So it's saying that essentially there was at least a 10%, so it means 90% didn't change, but it's at least 10% change in the quality of life score. It was at least an improvement, or it wasn't deteriorating as quickly. 27.6 versus 27.7 months, or 27.7 versus 27.6. It's such a small amount of time if you look at it, just a few days. And it's for a small
10% better quality of life. Like, what does that even mean?
It's a score based on the person answering essentially what they can't do, how they're feeling, the pain, and so forth. It's still a valid measure. It's just that the amount of difference between the patients that are given this medication is maybe statistically significant, but it's not what you would think. When you say live longer, you're thinking years longer, a long time
Not
longer.
minutes longer.
It's just that, and again, I'm not saying these drugs don't have a purpose. It's just, it's quite striking when you look at the fine print and the disclosure is telling you something that, needs to perhaps be better discussed. So then you can more carefully look at the potential side effects and risks of taking the drug and then decide with the potential actual benefit to you and how many days and quality of life and so forth, just whether it's worth taking. Here's another one. What does this one say in big bold letters?
Optivo plus Yervoy, a chance to live longer. In a study of previously untreated SCLC patients, half of those on Optivid plus Yervoy were alive at 17 months versus 15 months on platinum-based chemotherapy.
So chemotherapy, a cancer treatment, chemical cancer treatment. Patient is being given an opportunity to try something to prolong their life. And now these are a combination of two drugs. And they're basically saying that when you're comparing patients that are taking these two drugs versus someone that's just on a type of chemotherapeutic agents, that there's a difference. And yes, statistically significant difference, why they can put it here. But what's the real life difference that they're saying on the fine print at the bottom? In the two groups that they're comparing, half of the people, not all of them, only half, were alive. It doesn't say that they were thriving or doing great. They were simply alive at 17 months versus the other group, which at 15 months was the max they were alive. So there's only a 2-month difference. That only half of the people live 2 months longer by taking these drugs. And not only do you live 2 months more, it just says that you're alive. It doesn't say if you're on life support or whether you wish you hadn't lived those extra 2 months because you're not feeling well. This is serious business. Anyone that's being put on these medications is seriously ill. And again, not only does it say a chance to live, but it has the TM, the trademark symbol next to it because they're trademarking that. And the other thing that I find interesting after reading the fine print, a chance to live longer, that's like going to play the lottery. You have a chance to win the lottery, but most people don't actually think they're going to win when they go play it. And I would hope that when it comes to pharmaceutical, we should have a little better hope than the likelihood of being able to win the lottery when we play it. So that's, again, not knocking that these drugs don't have a purpose and a value. It's just, it seems very concerning when you read this fine print, which flashes on the screen briefly, that the amount of potential benefit, the amount of time you might live longer, we're talking 2 months in half of the people that were studied. And believe me, if there was some better outcome and it was a year or two, they would put it. This is the best they could muster to promote this particular combination of drugs. So
Just a little bit of a credit to this drug manufacturer is they said a chance to live longer, whereas the previous one said live longer. So at least they put in the term a chance there. I had pointed out earlier that the difference between 27.7 and 27.6 seems like it's below the margin of error, which means when you do these surveys, there's always a margin of error. And you rightfully noted that they should have already removed the margin of error from the calculation. But I think
it's not
the
that.
way
It's
about
that in scientific analysis, they're obviously looking for that. If it's statistically insignificant, okay, then it wouldn't be there. But the reality is you can still have a study that shows that statistically there is a difference. Okay, there is an actual mathematical difference. The outcomes aren't the same. But in the real world, okay, the difference is that nobody cares about that. You care about the reality of your condition and how much longer you're going to live, how healthy you're going to feel, whether, as like in the pictures, what showed what looked like a woman perhaps with a grandchild, are you going to be there how much longer to enjoy your grandchild? That's why people are willing to take some of these medications, knowing that there are risks and side effects. But if the potential benefit is very low, it may not be the right way to go. And that's a decision that's made between the patient, their families, and the caregivers, the physicians and prescribers. But I just find it concerning sometimes when it appears that some of the, certainly the advertising, isn't putting out there really these numbers. They're not hiding them. They are having to disclose them, but they're not being represented in the ad as well as they should be. And this is for the same two medications. What is this shows obviously what looks like some family having some fun over here. They got what looks like a
Sleepover.
campfire out there. And then what
Yeah.
does it say as the disclosure or disclaimer that flashes on the screen?
Problems can occur together and more often when Optivo is used with Yervoy. So the previous ad, which is the same ad, was talking all about how the fact that these two drugs together are so beneficial. And then you can get problems with each of these drugs, and it can be even worse when these problems are together. Do you have another slide you want to show? Or
I do. I have a couple more, and it's in the same theme. Ultimately, that's the thing. So wait a minute, I'm going to take these medications. They may have a benefit. It's not necessarily very clear from the ad how great the benefit is, but okay, I definitely want to consider it. But now in the fine print, it reminds you that taking those two medications together can cause more potential side effects because you're taking two medications together, not like a big surprise. And then you have another disclosure. What does this one say?
same
Oh, and
two drugs.
let's stop for a second. Let's not be distracted by the fact that it looks like it's the grandmother, her daughter, and the grandchild there, and they're all smiling and happy. I would
Having a
imagine,
picnic, playing the guitar in
yeah, there's a
beautiful
guitar, they're
nature.
outside.
Everything's green. They're camping. Everything's beautiful.
There's a
Sun is
lot of hope
setting.
and
They've got a nice
optimism.
scented calendar going. Everybody is smiling, of course. And it says Optivo plus Yervoy can cause your immune system to harm healthy parts of your body during and after treatment. These problems can be severe and lead to death. Yeah, we were just told that if you take both of these drugs together, then maybe you'll have maybe a chance of surviving an additional 2 months while you're taking chemotherapy, which kills your body. But now we discover that this can harm the healthy elements of your body and can even cause your death. So I think this really gets to the gist of this entire subject, and that is when people try to make decisions, we try and compare pros and cons. And what these advertisements are a way of showing the cons while trying to avoid showing the pros while trying to avoid showing the cons. And what people really need is to see them side by side and a real comparison. Like, okay, advantages, potential A, B, C, and D at the best case scenario. Disadvantages, these are the side effects. And what I don't like about side effects is that, yes, the drugs have to rattle off what side effects they can cause. They don't have to mention the likelihood that you will get those side effects. And I think that's where they really get you, because my feeling is that the likelihood of getting some of these side effects has to be so high where they are forced to put it in their advertisement. So the fact that they are forced to say, hey, this can cause lots of problems and taking them together can double the problems. Oh, and this can cause harm to your healthy body organs, which you don't have any problem with, but you will soon if you take our drug, and then you'll need more of our drugs probably. Oh, and it can even even lead to your death. Wait, that is what I'm getting in return for maybe being able to live 2 months longer? Like, it's just not the pros and cons people want to see. It's not clear the way people want to see them. People want to be able to know the likelihood of each of these side effects. And again, like I said, if they have to put it in the ad, it means that the likelihood is fairly noticeable, because otherwise they would probably not put it there. Yeah, what do you think?
And an important consideration, certainly in the area of cancer treatment, is that the treatments typically are very brutal on your body. Okay. And once you weaken, as it says here, that these medications will very likely cause harm to the healthy immune system and so forth, which you do need, and the immune system can be used to help fight off the cancer. Bottom line is, if you weaken the rest of your body, the likelihood of cancer progression, metastasis, is higher. And many patients don't die of their primary cancer targets. Those get beaten down with the medication and radiation and maybe surgery. But then you find a year later, a year and a half later, a lot of these cancers have spread. And it's very difficult to treat cancer when your body's weak. So that's why some of these disclosures are very important. That's why they're putting them there. And these are the conversations, again, that you have to have with your doctor, and maybe get a second opinion and try to understand really the waters you're navigating when you're getting your care. And that's really the purpose of the conversation. We're not saying don't take these drugs or they're all bad. It's not about that. It's that if you're going to advertise something, certainly for in the realm of pharmaceuticals, it's important that the people reading these ads really understand what this is about and not get a false understanding of what's good or bad about taking that particular drug. And as we're mentioning, it's not just the FDA and the drug industry, the pharmaceutical industry. It's the same thing across the board with food. I would tell you the two things are tied at the hip. Much of what's going on in our food industry is exactly the same. A lot of our foods have dyes and chemicals, and everything is laced with massive amounts of sugar, either fructose or other sugars that really, I think, are at the core of most of the illnesses that people have. The heart disease, the cancer, and probably other things such as, again, conversations about autism and other things that we now have in abundance in our society that really we didn't previously. So one of the next things I'd like to share is really a clip from really the discussions about the changes now. We have certain states that are starting to ban the use of certain chemicals in the foods, even though for many years in the United States we've considered them to be safe. There's a lot of concerns about this, and through the Make America Healthy Again movement at the federal level and a lot of the offshoots of that at the state levels, we are starting to see some changes in what is considered acceptable. So I'm going to cue that up for us to listen to and have some conversation about.
Yeah, it's nice to end this topic on a little bit of a more positive news. So let's watch that.
Here we go. And this is Vani Hari being interviewed. She's known online as the Food Babe, and she has been a real strong advocate for food safety and understanding the chemicals and dyes that are put into our foods here in the United States, many of which are banned in other countries. Here we go.
We are under enormous pressure from the American Beverage Association, and it was absolutely stunning to watch the Secretary of Agriculture, Brooke Rollins, call them out and say that they are going against American health.
How does it make sense that SNAP will pay for unhealthy sodas, for candy, and for junk food, but not for rotisserie chicken? The SNAP program is designed to help those in need of assistance, not to hurt them.
And so that's a message for every governor out there and anybody who tries to veto these bills. You are going against American health. Taxpayers are spending $10 billion giving that to the soda companies, another $4 billion a year for junk food. And over the next 10 years, they're estimating that it's going to be close to $240 billion of savings that could go towards healthier options. So we have to look at the root cause of why we are so sick, why we have rising rates of diabetes, heart disease, and obesity in this country. And it starts with what we're eating. Food is medicine. We know soda does not provide a nutritional benefit to the human body.
Yeah, and the general idea of SNAP, and that's it used to be called food tickets or something, but that's for people who struggle in terms of sufficient income. The idea is to provide them with the nutrition that they need to survive, but instead, the vast majority of that SNAP funding goes to right back to the industries that have been funding and lobbying for this in the first place, and that is the kind of the large manufacturers that manufacture very unhealthy foods. So it's not really going to organic vegetables and fruits and chicken and meat and stuff like that. Instead, the vast majority of the SNAP funding ends up going to destroying people's nutrition instead of helping them with their nutrition. And that is the entire idea of this thing. And again, this is where we get to see how the government, in the name of acting for the benefit of the American people, actually do harm to the American people, even if it's the American people making the final choice at the end of the day. If that money is going for nutritious, it should be for nutritious food and not for extremely unhealthy and damaging food that will make you sick. But it's a circle, right? The food manufacturers work together with the drug manufacturers because why bite the hand that feeds you, right? And quite literally, the food manufacturers feed the drug manufacturers, and it's almost like an evil circle. So yeah, for some reason, like we've mentioned before, Elon keeps on emphasizing this. The perception of doing good is very easy. The actuality of doing good is very hard. People who care about the perception of doing good, oh, we're helping hungry people have more food. No, you're actually helping them become more sick and then spending more time in hospitals and doctors' beds and consuming more medicine, right? Again, even if it is the choice of the people, if this money should be for nutrition, it should be for nutrition, not for, this is food stamps was the word I was looking for, also known as SNAP. What do you think?
And just so you know, what you're describing is really about biting the hand that feeds. There is a tremendous lobbying effort that's been ongoing forever. And there's Casey and Kelly Means. They are a brother and sister team. She's a doctor, and he used to work for a large sugary drink company, which I won't name, probably the most common household name. And he's spoken publicly a lot about how essentially they did everything in their power to make sure that every time there was an effort to remove sugary drinks or other foods that we would colloquially call junk food from the SNAP or food stamp program, as it had often been called, they would do everything to convince the politicians to vote against such an effort. And the reasons, in fact, I've heard the same kind of thing this time around, has been, oh, you don't understand. You're discriminating. You're hurting the poorest people. It's unfair that someone that's poor can't have a sugary soda or can't have candy. Why punish them? And what's ironic is you're not punishing them. You're allowing them, and by design, making foods available that are healthier. Because the last thing you need, if you are unable to go out and buy food regardless of cost, you want to make sure that the best quality and healthy food is available to you if you're on one of those programs. But the lobbyists and the marketing is often twisted in a way that makes the politicians scared of supporting any measure which reduces or cuts off these types of food of being SNAP eligible. And this time around, maybe something different will happen. And it's goes beyond that. I just think many of these foods shouldn't be widely available with some of the chemicals and things that they have in them. I think we need to make some changes. And again, it's not about going in and completely banning everything, but we certainly don't want to essentially encourage this to happen. And there's been transformations in different states where Sarah Huckabee Sanders was there. I think she was going to announce that her state is going to be also making changes. There's several states now that are talking about making the needed changes. And then there's a final recognition that this is a problem. The next clip, very short, Megyn Kelly just basically talking about her own realization of what she's doing every time she gives her kid. Even if it's junk food, it's not just junk food and maybe going to put on a few pounds, but listen to what she says about her 14-year-old.
My daughter turned 14 this past Monday, and I was baking her a cake. And I just got the Duncan Hines. I'm not going to lie, I can't do anything from scratch. But then I just took a moment to look at what was in the icing with which you would use to write happy birthday. Everything in there was red dye number this, yellow dye number that, green dye number this. And I thought, this could alternatively read carcinogen X, carcinogen Y. And that's where I drew the line. I'm sure there were tons of seed oils and so on in the cake itself. But my point is, how does that even make its way onto the shelf where the vast majority of people have no idea that all those dyes that are in our food, but not in the Europeans, can cause cancer? And so I'm giving my child cancer for her 14th birthday, which is a no.
Yeah, and I think it's just, especially when there are sufficient decent alternatives out there. That's the thing, is that it's not like the European Union banned or Canada banned these dyes and suddenly there's nothing colorful in the European Union or Canada anymore. They can use beetroot to create purple dye. There are different techniques they
It's
can
not
use.
as colorful though. So one of the
True.
things that the food babe has pointed out and brought and went and has repeatedly shown examples of, this is a bag of Fruit Loops, which again, I don't even encourage anyone to eat Fruit Loops regardless of how they color it. But here's a bag of Fruit Loops in the United States, and here's one in Canada or the European Union, and they don't look the same. The US one is so brightly colored, and we're drawn to brightly colored things. The kids are as well. And there's no other reason why they would put that in there. It's an inexpensive food coloring, but it's designed to be attractive looking. So that should never be done at the expense of quality or at the expense of how healthy something is. And unfortunately, that's been what's been going on.
And
And
at the end of the day, the question is how much does it affect sales? And I don't know if if there was a noticeable drop in sales for these foods after these rules went in and they had to replace the dyes that they were using. But just the whole concept, people assume that if something is called food coloring, then it is color that you can use as food that is edible, right? If it's filled with carcinogens, how the hell is it a food coloring? Just humor me. Why is it called a food coloring if it's poison?
because, again, as you mentioned earlier, when you do a study, it may or may not seem that it's going to cause cancer in the quantities being given. But the bottom line is, it's why would you want to take a chance? And here's where we're at. We know something is going on with everyone's health in the United States. Okay, there's never been more people who are obese. There's never been more people with type 2 diabetes. There's never been more autism and Alzheimer's, and you can go on and on. Okay. And that being said, we have a problem. We may not agree what's causing the problem, but we're in a desperate situation to figure out what is causing it. And we certainly have to look at everything. And we certainly have to look at these particular things. And the medication side of it and the food side of it are just two sides of one coin. Okay. If you stay healthy, you won't need medication. Not that long ago, people weren't on 10, 20 medications. Today, the older someone gets, the more you can determine how many pills they're going to be taking, because that's just the way it is. And the sad part is that the same sort of marketing, maybe deception is a big word, but concerns that exist in pharmaceutical marketing exist with regards to marketing of food. There will be a lot of foods that have a thing put on right in the front saying heart healthy. It's got a little heart. It's got some sort of approval from the American Heart Association or whatever. What they don't go out of their way to point out, yes, is that the American Heart Association, every medical association, gets huge amounts of funding from the food industry. So, like you said, you mentioned again, you don't want to bite the hand that feeds. So it's not that they're necessarily going and saying everyone can go out and start dosing with heroin, but there's a lot of encouragement to maybe look the other way. No different than you mentioned some of the concerns regarding the oversight in the aviation industry with some of the accidents that happened in years past. And ultimately, there's a reason why there are quote unquote regulators. They have to be regulating and watching what's happening. And if that isn't happening, that's a problem. And I think that people have had enough. There's enough of an interest in trying to figure out what's happening and why, and to ultimately get to some sort of better state of healthcare in the United States where people aren't all sick and needing all these medications. Then you wouldn't worry as much about all these little all the fine print and all the things that are being said there. I think that the most important thing is that if we were to put ourselves in the shoes of someone who's sick, if the physicians, the nurses, if everybody that worked caring for patients directly or indirectly understood what it's like to be sick, understood what it was like to be stuck in the healthcare system, okay, then perhaps, and that they were given the power and the opportunity to do the right thing, then I think things would be very different. And over the last many years, I've talked to a lot of physicians, nurses, technicians, and even people that work in clerical or administrative roles in healthcare, doctors' offices, and so forth. And I've encouraged them. I said, this is something you probably need to do from time to time, as I do, and that's to watch a movie. It's a Hollywood movie. It's basically, yes, it has somewhat of a fairy tale ending in a way, and it's got its ups and downs, but the movie is based on a true story. And the story was of a doctor who became sick. In the movie, it basically does the typical Hollywood thing, but it gives you the right message. And ultimately, there's a scene in that movie where the doctor was portrayed as a kind of arrogant heart surgeon. I worked with several heart surgeons for a few years, and you got to have a certain ego to be able to do that type of work, which is a good thing. When he started feeling a lump in his throat, knew there was something there. He kept ignoring it because he was too busy, like everyone else, to actually pay attention to himself. He eventually got the courage to go and get seen and was diagnosed as having a tumor in his throat, the base of his tongue. And ultimately, and interestingly, I've had a family member with the same type of tumor. And once that happened, the realization came to him that his life might change. Not only was there a risk of dying, but one of the ways of treating this is removing the tumor. If they did that, there was a high chance that he might lose the ability to swallow or speak. And he was a very successful, prominent heart surgeon. And in the movie, it shows him basically being too busy for his wife and his family and anything else. He's just so busy being a surgeon, which is not a far cry from what often happens. And now all of a sudden, he's had to pay attention to himself and to recognize the importance of the support that he needed from his family. And he walks in the movie to a waiting room to get some treatment or to get examined. And as he gets there, he tells the person at the desk how important it is that they hurry up and see him because there's all these patients waiting. And they basically asked him to sit down. And then one of the actresses in the movie turns to him and looks at him and says, "Doctor, now that you're here with us," basically, she says, I'm paraphrasing, "you're not a doctor, you're just a patient like all the rest of us. You're a nobody," basically is the message, and just deal with it. And that was really the crux, the turning point of the movie, where he started over time realizing that life from the side of the patient is nothing that anybody would want to ever have to endure. And at the end of the movie, he does something quite remarkable, and that's the very tiny clip I'd like to share. And I'd like to talk a little more about medicine and how when we trust the science and all these different things that we're programmed to do, we have to remember doctors are people too, but a lot of times it's easy for them and all the other caregivers to lose sight of essentially what it's like to be a patient. They may not even ever know what it's like to be a patient. All right, so
So while we go ahead and pull that up, I just have one suggestion for the new head of the FDA, and that is to maybe rename food colorings that have peer-reviewed scientific documentation that they are carcinogenic and can cause cancer. Maybe we should rename them from food colorings to colorful poison. And then we can put a little asterisk. It'll be colorful poison at small doses, not likely to cause your immediate death. I think that would be a great way of renaming the term food coloring, because they've lied to us with that terminology for so long. So let's go ahead and watch what happens when a doctor learns to think like a patient.
And let me tell you, just to end your point, we have to recognize that most of the tobacco industry companies, when cigarettes fell out of favor in the United States and Canada, in North America, these companies started acquiring the major food companies. Most people don't realize it's the same marketing that existed for cigarettes. It's the same looking the other way that happened for cigarettes. It's the same denial that existed for cigarettes. And what's even more, I don't know, shocking in a way is there are cultures of individuals, of people that are still tribal individuals who are smoking and don't have all the diseases we have. The cigarettes that were widely available in North America often had hundreds, if not thousands, of chemicals added to them. Okay, so the story, including, I believe, sugar was added to cigarettes as well. But the bottom line is the same playbook, the same concerns, the same issues that were raised when we were talking about banning cigarette use or reducing its use, and then putting warning labels on cigarettes is basically what you're recommending be done for certain food types. And in other countries, there are a lot of candy and fast food that actually have skull and bone warning labels on them, warning the people that if they eat it, that there could be some damage to their health. Let's play this and then we can see if this might be really the thing that everyone needs to keep in mind if they're working in the healthcare field.
Doctors, you have spent a lot of time learning the Latin names for the diseases your patients might have. Now it's time to learn something simpler about them. Patients have their own names. Sarah, Alan, Jack. They feel frightened, embarrassed, and vulnerable, and they feel sick. Most of all, they want to get better. Because of that, they put their lives in our hands. I could try to explain what that means until I'm blue in the face. But you know something, it wouldn't mean a thing. It sure as hell never did to me. So, for the next 72 hours, you'll each be allocated a particular disease. You'll sleep in hospital beds, eat hospital food, and be given all the appropriate tests. Tests you will one day prescribe. Unbelievable.
Yeah, so this is a clip after he told them to change from their regular kind of nursing. I think these are physician assistants from their uniforms. They're not. Oh, they're
all medical students, basically interns, medical students. They're not yet doctors. And his idea was that since they work, if you listen to what he says, if they're going to once they become doctors, they need to remember what it was like to be a patient. So they basically have to order all the tests that they would have to run based on whatever chart they get. It's going to say what disease they supposedly have. They would have to order the tests. So if the test was to get blood work, if it's to go and get a colonoscopy, they need to have those tests performed on them. Now, again, this is a Hollywood movie, but the truth is, and that's William Hurt, the lead actor. He passed away going on 3 years ago now. And he did a really good job, I think, in representing the gist of the original book. The book is called, and aptly so, it's called A Taste of My Own Medicine. The book was written by Dr. Edward Rosenbaum and was an account of him getting sick and understanding for the first time really what it meant to be a patient. And I don't wish illness on anyone. And there's only one thing worse than being sick, and that's having to endure the healthcare system in this country or probably any country. I can tell you that the grass isn't always greener somewhere else. I spent many years working in and around the healthcare system in Montreal, Quebec, in Canada. And it's no picnic over there either, even though it's a somewhat socialized type of healthcare system that each province has. It's not an easy solution. And the most important thing to glean from all of this is don't get sick. And if you're involved in caring for the sick, it's time to periodically remind yourself of what could happen if you ever became that patient. So yeah. I think that's really important.
I think this video was from a movie called The Doctor. Is that correct?
That's correct. So The Doctor is the Hollywood portrayal of The Taste of My Own Medicine.
So that kind of reminded me of another movie with a very similar name called The Physician. That is a movie that takes place in the medieval periods in England, where kind of medieval medical concepts were the commonplace, and those were many times very damaging to people. And it's about a young student who wants to become a doctor. And during the Dark Ages in Europe, it was the golden age of Islam. So he meets some Jewish doctors and they start teaching some things. And then he's able to slowly travel the world until he arrives to the greatest doctor at that time in Spain, I think, Andalusia. It was the name of the Arab-controlled Spain. And the name of the doctor is Ibn Sina. And that is portrayed by the brilliant actor Ben Kingsley, I think his name is. And yeah, it's just a very fascinating movie about kind of ancient medicine. I like movies that take place in a different time period because it gives us a glimpse of what life was like. And then when you realize that they didn't have a theory of bacteria, and that many times doctors would deliberately use the hands with bloods from one patient to another patient. I think they believed that if it was warm, then it would be better for the new patient or something like that. So in this movie, the physician kind of learns the basic concepts of the fact that the rats and the bodies laying around everywhere, and this is during the Black Plague, that these could be causes for additional people getting sick, and just the basic concept of moving the bodies away and burying them and moving the sick people aside and keeping everybody healthy and separate. Just very basic ideas, the basic idea of bacteria and germs and how revolutionary that was for its time. So yeah, that's just a great movie. Do you happen to have a clip of that or no?
I do. I can put it up to just give a little bit of the, in fact, I think what I will do is we'll continue the discussion. We can maybe put it up without any audio. I would say that with regards to your description, that's totally accurate. Everyone just assumes that surgeons and doctors wore gloves all the time, and this was the way it's always been. And it hasn't. Much of the benefit of medicine has been really derived from the use of antibiotics. Many of the diseases that we think were cured by vaccines and this, that, and the other thing really have to do with basic changes in society where we started understanding that once we knew there was bacteria and that where it could grow, that there was the idea of washing your hands, not only by doctors, but by people in general. People handling food would wash their hands and keep it clean. And that I think if it weren't for doctors as portrayed in this movie, this is the physician that you described that movie, we would have never probably figured this out. How people were dying and no one knew why. They were trying all kinds of crazy treatments on these individuals without understanding that oftentimes the doctors were the carrier of disease from one sick patient to the next.
Yeah, we're really lucky that we're born and that we live when we do. Even living in a time before there were available, the term I'm looking for is for drugs that kind of put you to sleep, or anesthetics,
Mhm.
was just brutal. No matter if it was a small issue or a big issue, the suffering you would have to go through for the doctors to hopefully do something to save your life in an unsanitized manner was just completely terrifying and brutal and very painful. And we are very lucky to be living when we are at the moment. But just the earlier concept that you brought up of a lot of what we consider disease has to do with the environment. And like we said, you are what you eat, but also just the environment of where we are and how we live, especially things to do with kids and their behavior. I think the modern education system is an outcome of the Industrial Revolution. So prior to the Industrial Revolution, the concept of mass education for everyone was extremely rare. It existed mostly princes and priests who would educate their children, priests to clergy, and princes to educate them because they would be future leaders. The one side note is Jews had education throughout almost all of history. And so it was very traditional for Jews to study for thousands of years from age 3 to age 18, usually when they're ready to get married. But the concept of general schools, general education, is an outcome of the Industrial Revolution because factory owners realized that they need factory workers who can read and write and complete basic computational calculations. So they created a production line for factory workers. And that is what we call the education system. And if you look at the modern day education system, it really is very reminiscent of a production line, right? You put 30 kids in a classroom who have to sit there in front of one lecturer who sits there and who yells at them and who delivers things for them to memorize. And then they move from one classroom to another classroom, from one age to another age, until they graduate from the production line of school and they're ready for the production line of work, right? And education as a whole, at least public education, hasn't changed drastically a lot over the past 100 to 200 years. I think Montessori schools are very different and are a very fresh idea. Obviously, Maria Montessori is 150 years old. Obviously, she's no longer alive, but the concept of that type of education where children are free to pursue their interests, to pursue what they enjoy, what entertains them, but in an organized manner where children are not siloed based on their exact age with other children of their exact age. Rather, they get to be with children who are a little younger and a little older, and they can learn things from the older kids and they can teach things to the younger kids, and teaching is the best way of learning. This seems like a much better model of education, at least to me. We recently saw a post by Chamath Palihapitiya from the Phenomenal All In podcast about how when the school diagnosed his child with ADHD and they wanted to put, I think it's the son or daughter, on basically methamphetamine, which is what most of these ADHD drugs are. And he was like, just no, like the issue is an issue of environment. It's an issue of setting. It's an issue of the teachers not having the capacity or the willingness or the strength to put up with 30 children at a time and give them personalized attention and teaching them. It could be issues of problems at home. It could be issues of what they're eating. And plus, I mean, what we consider ADHD as like a sickness, a disease, is really children wanting to get up and run and play and climb trees. That is what children are. That is what children are supposed to be. That is the definition of childhood. The fact that we turn that into some evil thing, and now if they're not willing to sit like robots and take methamphetamine, then the only solution is to drug them up and put them in these classrooms and fit them, squeeze them into the system. Yeah, it just seems like it's a huge mistake. Recently, there was an article in the New York Times that delved very deeply in depth on the outcomes of these drugs to children. It turns out that while post 13 to 18 months, I think it does seem like these are effective at helping the kids sit down and focus instead of being children and getting up and running around. After 3 years, it loses the vast majority of its effect. And these kids continue to regularly consume this very powerful drug. So yeah, do you have anything else to add on the whole ADHD conversation that's been exploding recently?
Sure. Listen, it's not just ADHD, it's autism, spectrum of autism, which is a very broad representation. It's Alzheimer's, it's cancer, it's type 2 diabetes. The reality is these things just have all exploded out of nowhere, where now there's just such a prevalence of patients with these conditions. And I think it all goes back to the same thing. What's the root cause? What's causing this? Humans didn't suddenly start getting sicker, didn't start having all these conditions that they didn't have before. Some people will argue it's not that those conditions didn't exist, it just they didn't know how to diagnose them. I don't buy that, okay? Because pediatricians will tell you that they weren't seeing children with many of these conditions. The example I've given in other episodes includes even type 2 diabetes. When I was taught in various, both for my exercise science, when I was learning exercise physiology and so forth, when I had my paramedic training, ultimately type 2 diabetes used to be called adult onset diabetes. They can't call it that anymore. Kids in grade school have type 2 diabetes, so it's no longer adult onset. And how did that happen? How is it that it never happened before? That was unheard of. We had to change the name of this condition because now kids have it at a young age. And so what are the consequences of metabolic dysfunction, where the patients are displaying that they have diabetes because they have altered metabolism, high blood sugars? What's happening? What else is it affecting? And we know from endless studies now that patients with various conditions, with Parkinson's, with Alzheimer's, with even psychiatric conditions like schizophrenia, depression, patients have seen marked changes when they have radical changes made to their diet under clinical testing conditions, where they say these patients couldn't perform certain tasks and then they change their diets, primarily moving towards a keto diet and reducing, massively eliminating sugar intake. There's no minimum daily requirement for sugar. No one's going to die if they stop eating sugar, okay? What will happen is if you slowly wean off of eating sugar, your body will eventually learn to do what it was originally programmed to do, which is switch to ketones from burning fat. And I think most people now that we know, walking around, including myself up until not that long ago, we couldn't do that. Our bodies only knew how to burn sugar, and that takes a toll. So I think that, again, as a theme to the discussion earlier, we have to take a step back, understand what's causing all this, look under every rock, look for every possible food additive, There's a whole concern over GRAS, which is not the kind the cows eat or the horses eat, but it's an acronym for generally recognized as safe. Originally, there were just a few things in food manufacturing that were GRAS items. Now there's like endless that if they're used in small enough quantities, they don't even have to list them on the ingredient list. Spoiler alert, when you look at the ingredient list, it doesn't list everything. And it doesn't list all the things that are done to the food and all the chemicals that are used on the food. Because if it's done in passing and it's not considered an additive, it's just that the food was treated with it, it's not listed anywhere. It's a standard industry practice. So there's a reason why so many people are sick. And I think the bigger concern is if the only answer is take this pill, take that pill, get a shot of this and a shot of that, go see a doctor 3 times a week, that may not be the best route. It's an okay way to look at it, maybe for an acute, emergent sort of situation where you're having someone who's having a breakdown in their health, but that shouldn't be the long-term goal. And I think that's the big failure in medicine today. Doctors, the entire healthcare system is geared at it's like you have a boat that's springing a leak and you're just putting corks into the holes each time. Maybe you need to ask, why is the boat springing so many leaks? Maybe you need to stop taking the boat into such shallow waters and taking on all that risk. And the risk here is eating some of the things we're eating, and all the medications have risks. If you have to take them, you do, but the goal should be to get off of them if you at all possible. These are conversations that I think, again, they've been had behind the scenes, but now to see government and to see some doctors actually coming forward and openly discussing their own worries, and to have some people in the media at least starting to bring this to the table and pointing out just how scared they are for their own health and that of their families. And then you have people like this, the food babe, going out and making a ruckus with all these companies and forcing them to wake up. She's one of many that are now out there, and people may not quite realize just how important it is that there are people like her and even like us just even talking about this, because this isn't some crazy conspiracy theory that there's a problem with our food system or with the medical system or with the pharmaceutical industry. There are issues, and I think we need to work together to rectify them.
It seems like the entire medical industry has basically reorganized themselves to avoid pain at all costs. And that's why we're seeing like pain management doctors become really popular, which are basically doctors who can prescribe really horrific drugs to you that will get rid of your pain. But and we've seen that hospitals are rated by, basically patients have a questionnaire and it's how do you feel your pain was treated? And if anybody's in pain, then they're going to complain. So therefore, the hospital is incentivized to give people as much drugs as possible to reduce their pain. And if they end up becoming addicted and end up dying on the street in fentanyl 3 months or 3 years later, then that is what it is. But it doesn't seem like the medical world really cares that much, because they are derived. And again, I'm not referring to the entire medical world, but at least many aspects of the commercialized medical world, that they're focused on the reduction of pain. And when you focus on the reduction of pain, you're focused on treating the symptoms and not the root of the problem. And that really seems to be the issue, because how can your doctor, like who thinks your doctor has a right to tell you to eat healthy food and to do sport? Like, how dare he even tell you such a thing? His job is just to make sure you don't complain about pain. So if you're in pain, you go to him and then he'll give you a drug so you're in less pain, and then but it was just really ironic. Not long ago, we were in Mexico and my father-in-law was visiting us, and he had these open ulcers in his foot. And we called a local doctor to come and see it. And the local doctor asked to see what drugs he was currently taking. And there was a list of 20 different drugs my mother-in-law pulled out. And he starts going through them. And this and this are all treating the exact same symptom. These 3 are 3 different names of what is basically the same drug, or the same active material. And it's, again, why should anybody be taking 20 drugs on a regular basis? That doesn't make any sense. And he just kept on like drilling in. You're gonna have to walk. And my father-in-law has huge pain when I walk. That pain is what's causing blood to rush to the area, and that's what's helping your body, those wounds, close and get better. And the doctor was like, get rid of half, he marked like half of the drugs, stop taking them, and focus on eat healthy, eat salads every single day, walk a lot. And he actually did a procedure where he was like pulling out the open, dried up fat that and fibers, basically like the inside of his body that was there and rotting away in this open wound. And he like manually pulled it out. And my father-in-law was intense pain, intense pain. And I think it was very refreshing to see a doctor who was like very understanding that, like, if you want to actually solve this problem, stop taking the drugs that may be causing the issue, especially when there are so many different redundancies and so many different things that are actually causing problems. So he, like, some of these drugs will cause him to urinate a lot, but then he has problems because he's urinating too much. And then he has problems because of, and then he needs sleeping pills because he doesn't wake up to urinate in the middle of the night. And it's just like one pill is for another pill is for another pill for another pill. And at the end of the day, it's just ridiculous. But it was very refreshing to see this doctor who was like very clear about, yes, you have an open wound. It will cause pain when we are basically operating on it. It wasn't an operation. He was just locally in our house. He was pulling these pieces of tissue out. And my father-in-law was in immense pain. And I'm sorry, but it is what it is. If you want it to cure, this is what we have to do. And really, he kept on doing it and the wound kept on closing. So it was working, right? And for years, he went to doctors and the doctors couldn't help him. And this is not some Eastern medicine. This is a Western trained medical doctor, except being in like very authentic Mexico, he just had a different way of thinking than most American doctors or Israeli doctors for that matter. And it's, if you are sick, then you will be in pain. That is part of what being sick is. And the reason why you are in pain is for your body to kick your ass to get up and do what's right, so you'll stop being in pain, as opposed to just treating the symptom and, oh, we'll give you some drugs so you're no longer in pain. Yeah, it just seems like perverse incentives. And unfortunately, when you are sick, when you are injured, you will be in pain and it will suck. But hopefully that'll motivate you to get better, as opposed to just treating the pain, because that's not a solution. That's just extending the problem for another day.
You bring up a couple of interesting points. One, I'm going to just clarify. When you're mentioning, you're basically describing the opioid crisis, and that's been somewhat, it's like a pendulum. Now it's gone the other way. So there were lawsuits, investigations, and what they were finding was that there was an overprescription situation with various opioid medications, narcotics. Okay. People have been arrested. We had doctors even here in Florida and Miami who were basically giving this stuff out like candy. There were towns in the United States where, when they reviewed, they saw that there were more medications being given than there were to patients in the whole state out of some little town. Okay, so arrests were made, people lost their medical licenses. The pharmaceutical companies were dramatically downplaying the dangers and the addiction likelihood of these drugs. And what happened was, because as we discussed earlier in those examples, with the marketing literature given to the doctors, totally downplayed the risks. So when you have a patient in excruciating pain, what are you going to do? You're trying to reduce the pain. And if you believe that the likelihood of addiction is small, you'll keep prescribing and often overprescribe. Now there are patients who can't get their hands on the medication they need to control pain because doctors are under tremendous scrutiny and are being warned not to overprescribe narcotics. So interesting that there's actually been a switch, but it's not because of anything other than people dying, people becoming addicted. And what happened is a lot of patients would eventually be cut off because they would get more and more accustomed essentially to the medication that they were being put on, and they needed more and they just couldn't get a high enough dose. So they turned to the streets and bought drugs off the streets to be able to try to control their pain. And there are a lot of people that died. And then you can look at the fentanyl situation, where fentanyl is, a lot of people don't know, they think it's just some street drug. Fentanyl's been used in the
developed in a lab by medical companies.
I'm sorry?
It was developed in a lab by medical companies as the less addictive version, supposedly, of
it was basically more powerful. So there's a number of opiate medications that we used in the operating room all the time, and anesthesia uses all the time. These drugs weren't a problem when used correctly by people that were trained to know how to use them. The problem is that you could actually manufacture them relatively cheap and you could spread them on the streets and like anything else. It's not that fentanyl was a bad drug when used correctly in the right setting. Problem is you can't just start taking it like candy and you can't lace everything with it. But so the opioid situation was one that was rectified because it just got so out of control. It's almost like the border situation where it's okay if some people came across the border, but when millions and millions were coming across, all of a sudden problems
All hell breaks
happened.
loose.
Elections were won in large part because of that. Okay, so things.
Wasn't morphine marketed as the less addictive version of heroin, and then it turned out to be more addictive? And then after morphine, there was another drug that the drug companies also promoted as being less addictive, almost non-addictive, and something that you don't have to worry about being addicted to at all. And it's even better at treating pain. And then it turned out to be even more addictive than morphine. So it seems like fentanyl is just the last version of this thing where it's like less addictive but greater at treating pain, and it turns out that it's more addictive
But
than anything
again,
before.
these are not
And
drugs
something,
that are to be handed. These are not drugs to be handed out like candy. Okay,
yeah.
there are places to give these drugs correctly.
Mhm.
Morphine is like heroin, but it doesn't give you the same kind of high. It's used for medical purposes, where people want to get
Mhm.
high, they typically will go for heroin. But ultimately, if all they can get is morphine, they'll take that and they'll get accustomed to taking that drug. The problem is these type of medications, as you take them, you need more and more to get the same effect, to get the same relief from the pain. And it gets to a point where you're taking doses that are incompatible with life. You just can't tolerate them. So ultimately, pain management is, yeah, it's a big deal, but there's a consideration. You want to be able to treat pain and help patients not be in pain. There's things other than drugs to do that as well. But you do bring up an important point. Pain is there for a reason. It's there to tell us something is wrong. Like
Mhm.
fever, just giving a Tylenol every time someone has fever maybe isn't the right thing. Now, if the fever is exceedingly high, yes, it can be dangerous. But for an adult that has some fever, there may be a benefit in tolerating the fever because your body has fever for a reason and it's trying to fend off typically an infection. So I think that's what has happened is that we have become a society. And if you ask doctors, and they're being honest with you, they'll tell you where the patient will go to the doctor. And if they don't get the pill to treat the pain or some other pill to do something to fix whatever it is they're complaining about, they won't be happy with that doctor. They'll probably go to the next doctor and try 2, 3 doctors until they get to one that actually gives them the pill that they want. Because that is what people have been led to believe is the correct way to do things. And it's not easy being on the receiving end as a doctor or other prescribers, a nurse practitioner, physician assistant, etc., with patients who are demanding. I went online and I checked, and you can give me this, and this is the dose, and this how many times I have to take it a day, and it'll solve my problem. But
Those are the
sometimes
patients that I worry about.
solving the short-term problem may not solve the long-term problem, right? So if we believe the story of Noah's Ark, we needed the boat for the short-term problem, which was all the water and rain. But the reason that happened biblically was because of the acts and actions of people on this earth, right? And if people were not to right their ways, that's why that was necessary. Same thing with these treatments. They're not going to necessarily fix the problem. They may hide it or temporarily make it seem like the problem went away. If we're not ultimately looking at what's causing it and going after that cause, which could include improper nutrition, not enough sleep, not enough exercise, very basic things, then things will happen. And then the healthcare system is not really equipped for that. Our healthcare system is really designed to cut things out if you're a surgeon, which sometimes is necessary.
Or
It's
to
designed,
medicate things if you're in pain.
it could be the right thing to do. It could be the right thing to put in an artificial hip or other artificial body part because you've worn the other one out. But again, why did that happen? It's one thing if you're hit by a Mack truck and you have broken bones. It's another if you question yourself. Let's say I have a family member that's younger than me, and he has avascular necrosis, which avascular means without blood supply. Necrosis means essentially dead tissue. So he has avascular necrosis in his hip. And the most likely cause is because he had issues with his hip and he was put on steroids. And when you're put on steroids like that for about 6 years, you almost always wind up with a vascular necrosis. And then what happens is there's not really an easy way to fix it, except maybe cutting off the top of the leg bone, the femur, and replacing it with an artificial part. So that's the thing. We all need to take a step back and look at root causes and finding ways to prevent that from happening. And unfortunately, that's not always the way it's been.
Yes, let's go on to our next topic, which is men playing in women's sport. Now, some trans activists will tell us that if a man identifies as a woman, then he is immediately 100% a woman, whether he's taking drugs or doing operations or not. As we know, that's not true even when somebody does take drugs and do operations. But it's funny that one is not even required to go through those significant steps in order to claim that they are the opposite sex. The odd thing is, I've noticed many stories of males participating in female sports, but I have yet to see any stories of females participating in male sports. I'm just curious to why that could be. It just seems completely unbelievable to me. How is this such a one-sided thing? I thought that if a female decides that she's a male, then she is immediately a male. So why aren't we seeing more females compete in male sports? Why is it just a one-way thing?
I can't say that it's only a one-way thing, but certainly it's more visible when it's the other way. And I'll say a few things on this. Number one, the trans people that I've known, they don't want to call themselves out. They genuinely feel that they were born into the wrong body and they want to live their lives. So if you're born a male and you really sincerely view yourself in every which way as being a female, and that's how you're going to live your life, that's fine. And I don't know of one trans person that actually thinks it's okay to go and try to compete in women's sports, because although they're a trans woman, they understand that biologically they have an unfair advantage over the actual biological females. It's no different than even in other sports, even male sports where you have boxing or what have you, wrestling.
Different weight
There's
classes, yeah.
there's weight classes. Why is that? To just be fair. So it's the whole entire debate to me seems insane, because I would believe that the majority of trans individuals, they're not for this either. There's one probably quite well known who competed as an Olympian and did very well, and I looked up to him when I was growing up. And Mr. Jenner, who's now Ms. Jenner, who is a very respectable trans advocate, she's the first one to say, as an Olympian, that it's completely insane that anyone that biologically is a male would want to go and compete against genetic females. So it's odd.
I think she stands out. I don't necessarily think that she's the norm. Again, neither of us have any issues with an adult who chooses to do to their bodies whatever they like and to describe themselves and act in whatever way they like. Like, we don't mind. I'll call you whatever name you want to be called, even if that's Spider-Man. It is what it is. I may think of you differently theoretically, but you have every right to do whatever you like as an adult. I think the issue is with the societal changes, the philosophical changes, and what we were seeing under at least the prior administration, indoctrination into this, where it was children were being indoctrinated into it, adults were being indoctrinated into it, as opposed to recognizing it as a mental illness like it was recognized until 2017 or something. It was recognized as a mental illness. Instead of recognizing it as that, now it's the whole world needs to accommodate somebody's feeling, and the fact that one day they feel like a male, another day like a female, and a third day like a cat. It gets ridiculous and preposterous at some degree. So again, if you're an adult and you want to do with your body whatever you want to do, you are free to do. I am not here to judge you, but don't require me to call myself a cisgendered male for that. I'm sorry.
Listen,
The rest of the world doesn't have to put up with whatever craziness. And especially, just please keep whatever you like, do whatever you want in your bedrooms, but keep it away from the kids. We don't have to indoctrinate children that being trans is normal. It's not normal. There are very rare situations of people who have abnormalities, physical abnormalities. It is something that happens on a regular basis, but it is not very common. And then there are people who have a mental framework that makes them think, or that causes them to feel like they're in the wrong body, and that's fine too. Just don't try to convince all of us that we are the weird ones because we are cisgender, and that our
So-
children all have to be open to being transgender in order to cleansing their sins of being a white male or something like that. Yeah, we have issues with the ideas, not with the people.
And the biggest thing that's really being debated now is in competitive sports, where if you have an unfair advantage for being biologically male, it's completely unfair that you're competing in sports where the biological females have virtually no chance of winning. And what's happening is
Which is
girls
why I
that
said
have
I
been
never saw the opposite sport happening. We never see females trying to be males in male sports because they don't have a
well,
very high chance of
and
succeeding.
if they would, it wouldn't be an issue. Because again, this is a question of fairness. That's the big issue. It's not because someone's trans, it's because it's unfair. So if the reverse situation occurred, it would be fair. And if they wanted to compete, I don't think it'd be as much of an issue. The issue is here that anyone that has high school biology will understand that men typically have greater ability to more respiratory volume, more muscle mass, on and on. They're physically stronger typically. When people say, well, there's exceptions, we're not talking about the exceptions. We're talking about these cases where these individuals are competing and they're basically making it impossible for girls who've been competing their entire lives to advance in their competitive sports because there's no way. In fact, a lot of these trans females who were competing previously as males and they weren't doing very well and now they switch over. So there's
And
that
then
side
suddenly
of
they're
it.
first place, right? Surprise.
Yeah, they might be 30th out of 30, and then they come over and they're number one by a mile. Not that they just barely won, they're winning, and no one can even come close. And to me, that's the concerning part because no one in good conscience would want to accept a trophy for something like that. But these individuals are. So that's certainly raises an eyebrow. And then the second aspect of this, other than the competitive sports side of it, is I have a daughter. I wouldn't want to have, when she was younger, certainly, I think she'd throw the guy out of the room now if he came in, or the trans individual if they came in and were naked. But we have young girls in dressing rooms who are trying to change, and to have someone there that's physically a male and have his male genitalia hanging out is not normal. Okay, there's all these accounts of these individuals often coming and not even being modest about what they're doing. Again, like everything, if it was handled differently, it wouldn't be an issue. It's an issue because it's been made into an issue because we've had confrontations where women don't feel safe, where women are losing their entire lives' work in competing where they can't move ahead because they're losing competitions with an unfair playing field. And I think we have two videos to play real quick that will help paint the picture. I'm glad that it looks like we are finally doing something to just try to be fair. What's happening through Title IX, which guaranteed essentially women's ability to have women's sports. The argument from the federal government now is that if you're a biological male, you can't compete against women. There are states that are pushing back, and they're pushing back because they're losing federal funding and they're taking the federal government to court and they're arguing. Maine is one example that's discussed here. They're arguing that a trans woman is a woman and therefore she should be protected. And ultimately, we all agree that everyone should be protected, but that doesn't mean that you take away the rights of someone else. So let's listen real quick and then we can.
Yeah, an easy solution is also to just have 3 different sports groups, one for males, one for females, and one's for trans athletes. I think that would show the division more drastically, and that wouldn't be beneficial. The important thing to remember is there are creeps, there are psychopaths, and when you create rules that enable them to act in their just relentlessly evil ways, then that is exactly what they're going to do. They're going to take that opportunity and they're going to use it. So we're not saying that everybody is like that, but when you enable that, then you have all these prisoners who decide the minute that they're arrested, oh, I just became a female. I was arrested for rape, but I just became a female, so now put me in a female's prison so I can rape some more people.
That's happened over and over again.
Yes,
where
exactly. So
trans women or biological males wind up in women's prisons and then wind up getting biological female inmates pregnant.
exactly.
And
So it's
not
like
necessarily at their with consent, talking rape.
exactly.
So again, this has reached a level of lunacy that just doesn't make any kind of sense. Let's go ahead and just listen to this.
Sure.
My first experience was when I was 13 years old. I was going to change for gym, and I walked into the locker room, and there was a biological male there. From that point on, my junior year, I competed in Nordic skiing and lost to a biological male numerous of times. I am fighting this fight for generations to come. And the fact that our governor can look the women of our state in the eyes and say, I'm not going to fight for you, is heartbreaking, and it's betrayal, Riley said. I just want to thank all these women standing behind me and President Trump for fighting for us, because even though my own governor isn't fighting for me, I know there are people out there fighting for me.
So I compete in soccer and indoor track and outdoor track. It was mentioned previously today, I had to watch at the main Class B state indoor track championship as my close friend and my teammate and other female competitors lost the state championship to a biological male. And this was heartbreaking for me to have to watch. And Riley said that it's betrayal, and that's what it is. It is the job of our elected officials to protect our young female athletes, and they have failed to do that. We walk into sports expecting to have a level playing field, and to walk into the state championship to see a biological male there and to lose to a biological male, that's betrayal. And so I am extremely grateful to AG Bondi for standing up for us when our elected officials aren't doing that. And on behalf of the girl athletes in Maine, I just want to say thank you all, and I look forward to having a level playing field back after this fight. So thank you.
So what's ironic here is that the feminist movement has fought very hard, very rightfully over the past 100 years to get females equal rights to males. And that was a very noble cause. And it succeeded. But the fight must continue, even when you've accomplished your objective, when you're fighting for ideological reasons. So therefore, they continued the fight, but they flipped everything over. And now they're fighting against women instead of fighting for the rights of women. So the same quote unquote feminists no longer care about females, and now they're fighting for the right of transgender men to be in female sports, and it's just wrong. There's nothing more to say about it, I think.
I also would say, because I'm from a different generation than you, perhaps, and I just couldn't understand how the feminist movement here in this country didn't do anything, let alone doing more. I was going to say didn't do more, but I don't think they did anything after the massive amount of rapes and torture of women that happened at the hands of Hamas. It was just, how can you say you defend and protect women if you don't even have a voice for that? And it's almost like it was a non-issue. And then the same thing with this, women aren't being protected. And I think that everyone has a role. And I also think, as I said earlier, this is a minority position, this whole right to compete. Most trans individuals want to be left alone to live their lives. They're not looking to go and compete in sports against biological women. That's not what they're looking to do. So
Yeah,
it's like
for making this noise.
It's a small number of people, and unfortunately, that small number of voices is being massively amplified by a few organizations and by certain people in political government who think they could use this as leverage. But given really the way the tide has turned, most people just say, look, we got to just be fair, reasonable with people. This next clip, essentially, if the first one didn't paint the picture, this one does. And I'm going to tell you, the sad part is at the end of it, this young lady, I believe she's 17 years old, recounting her situation. She's basically told to get on with it, move along. And this is the example of what a lot of young girls and young ladies feel when they're trying to voice their concerns about what's going on. I think there's nothing better than hearing her voice and understanding this.
Hello, my name is Celeste Deist. I am 17 years old, a junior and track athlete at AGHS. Most importantly, I am a woman advocating for the renewal of female rights, which recently has been overlooked and disregarded. I implore all of you to help put an end to this current injustice. Recently, I went into the women's locker room to change for track practice, where I saw at the end of my row a biological male watching not only myself, but the other young women undress. This experience was beyond traumatizing. I must add, he is not changing in our locker room because he's in his track clothes, dressed and ready to go to practice at the beginning of the day. Therefore, there's absolutely no reason for him to be in any locker room, let alone the women's. Adults like yourself made me and my peers feel like our own comfort was invalid, even though our privacy was and still is being completely violated. The individual who identifies as female has XY chromosomes. Biologically complete, this makes him a male. Because females have XX chromosomes. This is basic biology.
Okay, please wrap it up.
I just want to ask, what about us? We cannot sit around and allow our rights to be given up to cater to an individual that is a man, who watches women undress and is stripping away female opportunity that once was fought for us. Sadly, we have to try and regain our rights again. I hope you put effort into the restoration of our school safety. Thank you for serving our community.
Yeah, it's very sad, and what we've seen repeatedly is that when, at least during the previous administration, when women were complaining about this, they were told that it is you issue, and we can offer you counseling to figure out how to get used to the fact that males will now be dressing in your dressing room. But it wasn't the issue of the male in the dressing room, it was the issue with the female who dared to question or to complain about the practice. And it's just very sad, and thankfully it seems like this is starting to turn around. But it's basically every male's fantasy, right? To go into a dressing room and just look at females, etc., right? It's like the basics of what most males want to do. And if you're just going to enable creeps to be creeps, then people will act like creeps, right? We know that 5% of the population are psychopaths, and they may not act out all the time, but a lot of the people are psychopaths. And if you just enable it, or if you import them from foreign countries, then the number of cases where psychopaths mistreat people is just going to go up. So yeah, it is sad and it is scary, and we just have to understand there are biological differences between males and females, and this is something that was obvious to people for the last 500,000 years plus. So it shouldn't be taken into question now. There really is no reason for that. It seems
I think
like
some hope would be what's happening in the UK. It's a 30-second clip.
It's ironic.
It's ironic, right?
Yeah.
You would think that if any, because there's a lot of really strange things going on in the United Kingdom right now. But this quick clip basically sums up the right way to handle things. And that it's really the same thing we need to have here as far as how we approach this. What do you think?
A judge at the UK's highest court today has said a woman is legally defined by biological sex under the Equality Act. He also said the same law gives transgender people protection against discrimination. So what does this mean? In terms of concerns around single-sex spaces like female prisons, rape crisis centres and female hospital wards, transgender people with gender recognition certificates could now be excluded. For Women Scotland, the campaign group who took the Scottish Government to court, welcomed the ruling, and the UK Government says it brings clarity and confidence for women and service providers.
Yeah, so it seems even though the UK is falling backwards on many respects, at least in terms of basic biology, they were able to put a stop to the madness. I think countries that typically have languages which define things based on feminine and masculine, it's just obvious to people that there are males and there are females, and the whole concept of this being like not just the fact that there are transgender people, but they must be the norm and everybody else is a cisgender, it just doesn't add up to people because the language is associated. And that's why we heard these concepts of language being racism and language being sexism, when it's these activists themselves who are the sexists. Like we said, their great grandparents fought for the rights of women, and now they're fighting for the rights of men to abuse women. And that's just really sad. I think it's time we move on to the next story. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. It is. It's just refreshing. I said the idea being trans individuals should obviously have rights and they should be entitled to protections. But in this one example, in this one particular situation, it's just unfair to allow them to compete in in certainly in biologically non-equal sports, because it doesn't advance anyone's cause. So the UK I think is looking at the right way. I know one of the things we wanted to talk about before we wrap. The next thing is the Golden Dome. I have that queued up.
Oh, this is what I wanted to say.
What's that?
So it's worth noting that many of the things we were told about transgender people turned out to be completely false. So we've been told for many, many years that if you don't certify the trans person's delusions or identity crisis, if you don't affirm their identity, then they're extremely more likely to commit suicide. So how dare you question them? You're causing them to commit suicide. So you are a murderer if you question somebody being a transgender. What science has shown is that is actually very much false. To the contrary, what we are finding is that the rates of suicide amongst trans people are very high, and that's not surprising because they're not feeling certain in their identity. So it makes sense that, unfortunately, that the rate of suicide would be higher. But even trans people who complete all the operations and take the drugs and do the transition to their own satisfaction, which is very rare because the amount of drugs they have to take on a regular basis is crazy, and the amount of side effects and diseases that they can receive from the operations is huge. But even those who are satisfied with the completion of the process, their rates of suicide are even higher. So this whole claim that if we don't affirm them being transgender, we are somehow causing their murder, even if they end up taking their own lives, is false, because if we affirm them wanting to be transgender, it turns out that their rate of suicide skyrockets even further. So the whole concept of doing it and the reason why we were told to do it is false. Another very interesting statistic that is never mentioned by legacy media is that a large percent of mass shooters, especially school shooters, tend to be transgender people. So people are frustrated. They're taking very powerful drugs that are altering the core of who they are, right? These are drugs that are altering the basics of their biology. And I guess it isn't surprising that people on these drugs may act in kind of crazy ways at times. And it's very sad, but a lot of these school shootings and a lot of these just mass shootings end up being transgender people. Not all of them, but a large percentage of them. So it is worth further investigation to try and understand maybe there is a causation and not just a correlation, especially with the power of the drugs that these people are being given. It's worth noting that some of these drugs that are now that were being given commonly even to children were drugs invented for pedophiles in jails to chemically neuter them, essentially, right? And this is what some of these people are trying to convince us to give children, and that is pure lunacy. Thankfully, the world has graduated past that. So I think now we can move on to the Golden Dome.
Yep, certainly. And for those folks who don't know you, you're saying this from your heart, just saying that obviously if individuals need a better understanding and perspective on their lives, they should get it. It's not just handing out surgeries or medication. Just like we were talking about before, there's a tendency to just give the patient what they think they want without necessarily knowing what's best for the patient. And that's no different than what we were discussing before. But yes, we wanted to touch on, before we go, on the whole Golden Dome defense system for the United States. Let me pull that up. And we'll watch a bit of this. This is on News Nation, talking a little bit about it. And we can then wrap up with some talk on this too.
As Commander-in-Chief, my focus is on building the most powerful military of the future. As a first step, I'm asking Congress to fund a state-of-the-art Golden Dome missile defense shield to protect our homeland, all made in the USA.
However, critics say there's a conflict of interest.
I think this is exactly what the American people find really repelling, is that Donald Trump's biggest donor is actually cashing in on the investment he made in Donald Trump. And it's candidly, particularly what Donald Trump promised he wouldn't do. Remember all the talk of swamps?
Musk denies bidding on the project, posting on X, quote, SpaceX has not tried to bid for any contract in this regard. Our strong preference would be to stay focused on taking humanity to Mars. If the president asks us to help in this regard, we will do, but I hope that other companies, not SpaceX, can do this. Military analysts think the Golden Dome system could cost billions of dollars, Markey. However, President Trump recently signed an executive order directing the defense secretary to review programs with any more than 15% behind schedule or 15% over cost, possibly to be on the chopping block.
Yeah, for anybody unfamiliar, the Golden Dome is a take on the Israeli Iron Dome. So in terms of missile defense systems, there are different types of missiles you have to defend from, and then there are different defense systems you use in order to defend against them. So the most old school defense systems that we have are against ICBMs. So ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, these are missiles that have a ballistic trajectory. They typically will leave Earth's atmosphere and then travel in outer space for a few minutes before returning back to impact at very high speed and velocity. Those are fairly easy to intercept if you can sense their launch on time, because since they are ballistic, they do shoot in a fairly predictable trajectory, and therefore it is fairly easy to shoot up a very large interceptor rocket and to intercept it. The next level, so in terms of that, the most advanced systems in the world are the US THAAD, and which is a thermal high atmosphere defense, I think is the abbreviation for that, and the Israeli system called Arrow 3. The second level of defense is against ballistic missiles that may not be intercontinental, so they may not leave Earth's atmosphere, they fly lower. Those have a longer flight path. And in addition to those, also cruise missiles, which are basically bombs in the shape of little planes. So like big missiles, but they fly like planes. So for that, there are a variety of defense systems, including the Patriot, and many Air Force jets can shoot down these ballistic missiles as well as these cruise missiles. And then the hardest solution was what Israel was dealing with, which is these little rockets that are built in people's garages, in underground factories, under hospitals and schools, and they fly very low. They basically just fly over the fence. And it was for a very long time considered completely impossible to shoot these down, because you're shooting a bullet that's flying at the speed of a bullet with another bullet, except that you do not have a very long time. So for intercontinental ballistic missiles, you typically will have 7 to 10 or 15 minutes to understand the ballistic course and then intercept it. The most advanced interceptors, like the Arrow 3, will intercept it in outer space, actually. Then with traditional ballistic missiles and cruise missiles, it's much easier, because you'll sometimes have hours of them flying through the air before they arrive at your shores and you can intercept them. The real challenging part are these little rockets that just fly for 30 seconds, a minute, 3 minutes over the fence and then impact. And they're not accurate, and they're not always very predictable. Back in 2011, Israel initiated a program called the Iron Dome to defend against this. There was a lot of fight against it. There was a lot of research going into laser weapons, but it ended up being funded thanks to American funding in part. And the Israelis were able to develop technology to intercept it. They used the system's called the Iron Dome, and has 3 parts. There's the radar system, there's the command and control booth, and then there is the interceptor launchers and missiles. The missiles themselves are called Tamirs. And the problem was that Hamas and other terrorists are building rockets with pipes they dig out of the ground and they fill with explosives that cost a few $100, maybe a few $1,000, whereas these interceptors were costing originally hundreds of thousands of dollars. Israel was able to reduce their cost drastically by reducing some of the advanced technology on the missile's warhead and giving it a data link communication system, so that way it can communicate, and the radar that found the incoming rocket is able to direct it closer, and only when it is in close proximity it uses its own sensors to activate. So therefore it doesn't need advanced computers and advanced sensors to track it the entire way, and that saves on cost drastically. I think they were able to reduce the price to below $50,000 a missile as well, which is still a big parity with a few thousand dollars that the terrorists use. Obviously, Israel is much richer than most of these terrorists, so it can technically afford it, but at some point it becomes an attrition, right? Like how many more can you shoot down, how fast can you shoot down versus how many they can produce, right? So what we've seen the IDF focus on is trying to destroy the factories where these rockets are being produced. But the Iron Dome has been extremely effective. I think it was assumed that if it would have over a 70% success rate, it would be considered a success. It out of the launch, it had like an 85% success rate, and now it's 97%. It's also smart enough to determine if the rocket is going to land in a inhabited area or in empty fields. If it's an empty field, it's not worth shooting an interceptor rocket at. If it's heading towards an inhabited area, they will obviously shoot an interceptor. So the idea that the US should have a rocket defense system sounds like, obviously, how does the US, the greatest empire in the world, not have an Iron Dome system of their own? Like, how does small Israel have it and the US not? The basic premises is that the US has never needed it, and the Israelis definitely had the need that they needed to develop a solution for. But also, the United States is basically an entire continent. So until the Mexicans or the Canadians start shooting rockets at the United States, having a system to deal with low flying, short range rockets would not be very useful for the United States. Like we said, the United States already has THAAD, already has the United States Patriot. So the United States already has THAAD and the Patriot system and other defense systems, which are good for longer distance. And obviously, the United States Air Force and Coast Guard planes can defend against a lot of these ballistic missiles and cruise missiles. So the danger for the United States is not very prevalent for short-term rockets. So the need for an Iron Dome system wasn't very obvious. So when people started saying, oh, Trump is claiming that he wants an Iron Dome, is like, Trump doesn't understand the United States doesn't need an Iron Dome. And he's just crazy and stupid. Now, obviously, American assets around the world definitely need an Iron Dome, and we've already seen the United States test an Iron Dome. I think it was in Taiwan or in Guam or somewhere like that. So it makes sense for American Air Force bases, American military bases, and installations all around the world to have systems like the Iron Dome. But what Trump was referring to, especially with the renamed Golden Dome, because everything with Trump must be gold, is something for the United States. And it's like, this isn't even relevant. These are short-term rockets. What we found, though, is that, first of all, Iron Dome is great against drones. Most drones don't have a very long range either. But the Iranians have gotten very good at putting kamikaze drones and rockets built into shipping containers. And it is very, very easy to send the shipping container to the United States. So if China one day decides that they want to attack Taiwan on Thursday, and Tuesday, every shipping container that arrives in the United States on both coasts is, instead of Chinese goods, ends up being Iranian rockets and missiles, then suddenly you are needing to face these short range attack munitions in homeland United States. So this concept of, because we have oceans on both of our sides, we no longer need this, is irrelevant when they can smuggle it into every single port in every single container, and boom, the roof of the container opens up and they just start launching these suicide drones and these rockets. So suddenly a system like Iron Dome is very relevant for that. But the term Golden Dome is for the overall kind of system as a whole, and it is to protect against all missiles. So that it may include the short range stuff, but it also includes probably upgrades to the THAAD and the Patriot and additional batteries. Do you have anything to add?
The only thing I add is that obviously the military has an interest, so they may know things we don't know, but I think you gave some terrific examples as to why we probably need this. And listen, we certainly don't want to not be prepared, because things are changing and the world isn't always a friendly place. So I'm not laughing at any of this. I think definitely has to be explored. And if we can put in a system that is going to be functional, I don't believe that they're just going to put this thing up for no good reason on that.
Yeah, I think the last thing to address is Elon's tweet on the matter. So the fact that it's, oh, Trump is trying to give money to his crony billionaires because that's what they need, is they just want more money. It's like, the richest man in the world, really? That's what he needs? But I think Elon's response is freaking badass. And it is, we don't want to do this. Yes, it would be developing the most advanced missile defense system in the world history, and what was considered impossible 10 years ago, and replicating it on a much larger scale. And it's super advanced, super whatever. But Elon is, listen, this is a problem. This is an easy problem. Yes, it is super hard, but it is an easy problem that hopefully the legacy defense companies can handle. there was a rumor that the top bid was SpaceX along with Palantir, along with Anduril. So those are the three actually innovative defense companies. Anduril is very good at building these rockets and missiles at a very affordable price. Palantir has the most brilliant defense AI systems on the planet. And obviously SpaceX builds the most advanced missiles in the world as well. It was exciting to see that. Finally, these innovative startups basically theoretically being the front runner, but Elon right away got ahead of it and he's, this is not true. We've never put in a bid. And not only have we not put in a bid, we prefer that others solve this issue. These are the easy problems. We are focused on really hard problems like getting humans and humanity safely to Mars. If the president asks and we really need to help, then sure, we'll do whatever's needed. We'll easily solve this. But we hope that Lockheed Martin and Boeing and McDonnell Douglas and all these other defense companies can handle this on their own. If they need our help, we're here to help, but preferably they don't. This whole narrative immediately falls right through that, oh, he's just doing it to give Elon money. Elon doesn't want the money. He's preoccupied with much more important things like this. But if the hardest defense system is too hard for the legacy defense manufacturers, then SpaceX can easily handle it. And I think that just comes to show the prowess of SpaceX and the Elon's mindset, first principles solving issues. We saw this with Tesla as well when he was like, let's make all of our patents public because what we're really after is the transition of the world to sustainable energy. And if that helps our competition, so be it. And we saw that the American and the European companies their ego was too big for them to look at Tesla's patents, but the Chinese, they gobbled it up, and the South Koreans too. And that's why they make much more compelling EVs. So Elon's idea is we're not going to succeed by holding back our competition with patents. Instead of that, we will succeed by out innovating everybody 10 times faster than them. So if we are the most innovative and we ramp up our speed of innovation, then we will forever stay ahead. And that is what we need to do. Instead of trying to push our competition down, like we saw recently, OpenAI under the Biden administration, try and pass laws that only 4 or 5 companies will be able to develop the top range AIs, which is like OpenAI was successful at getting to the roof, and now they're trying to pull up the ladder so nobody else can climb up. They were a startup not too long ago themselves. So instead of Elon taking such an approach of we'll have all the patents and then we'll sue everybody, I think the much better solution is we'll just innovate so much faster. And by the time they copy us, they'll find our patents from 2, 3, 5 years ago. By the time they figure them out, they analyze them, they understand them, they replicate them. It's going to take them another 3, 5, 6, 7 years to do. By then we will be 10 years even further because our speed of innovation is accelerating too. So I think we're lucky to have such a mastermind and such companies in the United States.
I think so too. And I think to finish up, we should talk a little bit about the breaking news as reported by the Babylon Bee on the federal judge that's overturning pretty much every Trump accomplishment that's been had. I think this is super important news. Let's listen in for a little bit.
All right, quiet, please. Order in the court. Pursuant to my jurisdiction as a federal district court judge for the United States of America, I will be issuing my latest rulings regarding several cases that have been presented to me recently in conjunction with the actions taken by the President, Mr. Donald Trump. After considering the issues and both sides of the arguments, the court rules as follows. Firstly, with regards to the issue of the price of eggs, I order the price of eggs to return to $12 a dozen, as they were a few weeks ago. Further, I revoke any political credit Mr. Trump has received for the lowering of the price of eggs. Secondly, regarding the rescue of the astronauts who were illegally brought home from the International Space Station the other week, I order them to be returned to outer space immediately. Any discussion of the astronauts being rescued by Mr. Trump, Mr. Musk, or SpaceX is to be stricken from the record. Okay, for the sake of time, I'm going to try and speed the rest of these up. I order the White House to continue funding biodiversity communications in Nepal and transgender operas in Guatemala and Muslim Sesame Street in Iraq. I hereby order McDonald's to permanently bring back the McRib.
Excuse me, Your Honor, could you please repeat that?
The McRib. I want the McRib. I order 5 more seasons, 5, of the Meghan Markle show on Netflix. I can't get enough of it. Really good. I order Kenny Siefkin from my 4th grade class to apologize for calling me a wiener in 1968. It's wrong then, it's wrong now. I order Israel to return all the freed hostages back to Gaza. I order Neil Patrick Harris to come and fight me like a man. He knows what he did.
Excuse me, what did he do, Your Honor?
Oh, he knows. I order little Hitler mustaches to be drawn on all photos of Donald Trump, and maybe a pair of devil horns, or the silly glasses, horns, glasses. Either one's fine. Also, I'd like a nice set of throw pillows. That's not an official order. It's just would like a nice set of those extra pillows for the bed. Nothing fruity. That's just something that will give my room a look of distinction. Donald Trump is a wimpy little girly boy, and Judge Jones could beat him in skee-ball any day of the week. Donald Trump is a dumb, what a dork noodle. Madam Reporter, can you read that back?
Yes. Okay, Donald Trump is a wimpy little girly boy, and Judge Jones could beat him in skee-ball any day of the week. Donald Trump is a dumb, what a dork noodle, period.
I'm sorry, that's classic. And finally, according to the 28th Amendment, which I just made up and added to Wikipedia, I hereby appoint myself President of the United States effective immediately. I do this in order to save democracy. And I have the authority to do this because I said I have the authority. I am now the president, and the former president is no longer president.
Yeah, so that's hysterical, specifically because we've been seeing over the past few years all these activist judges. We've seen this with the lawsuits against Tesla, with activist judges passing just completely absurd results and giving billions of dollars in rewards to supposed shareholders that owned 13 or 9 shares 10 years ago. It's really just to these law firms that are doing it for the payout. And even when Tesla held a shareholder vote and literally tens of millions of shareholders voted and said, no, we support Elon's payout, the judges, no, I choose differently. And then we've seen this with Judge Boasberg trying to reverse a lot of Trump's rulings. It's an issue with activist judges trying to take control. And here in the United States, it doesn't seem like it's such a big issue. It's absurd and crazy that these people are judges in the first place. But thankfully, it doesn't seem like it's affecting the Supreme Court, et cetera. But what we've seen in other countries, notably Brazil, is the Judge Moraes basically took control of the country. And it's really creepy because the dictator is the Supreme Court, and specifically this judge. And we've seen a very similar situation in Israel where the Supreme Court needed to choose the new president of the Supreme Court. And this is what this I declare myself president reminds me most of. The president of the Supreme Court must be authorized by the minister of law, which is the person in charge of the legal system, and maybe by the parliament or something like that. The head of the Supreme Court was not able to get the correct authorizations because he was an activist. So his name is Judge Yitzchak Amit, and he just decided, I will declare myself judge of the Supreme Court. He did have the majority within the Supreme Court. Now, the court system is corrupt because they always elect from their own, so they always choose their own ilk. So he did have the agreement of at least the majority of the other Supreme Court judges, but he did not have the support of the parliament or the minister or the government. Yet he stood up and he declared himself the new president of the Supreme Court. Be damned of what people want or think or voted for. This is what I declared, is that I am now the president of the Supreme Court. So now there's this really awkward situation where the minister of law is like, or the justice minister is, I am unwilling to recognize you as the head of the Supreme Court. And this head of the Supreme Court is, I won't recognize you as the minister of law, even though that's what the people voted for. So what we've seen is, under probably 20 or 30 years, under a very brilliant but a notorious judge called Aharon Barak, he basically changed all of the rules that allowed the Supreme Court to get involved in anything. So you don't have to wait for a lawsuit to go through the court systems and arrive at the Supreme Court for the Supreme Court to make a decision. Instead, anything in the country the Supreme Court does not like, the Supreme Court can just decide that's illegal and control that. And so this has been going on for a very long time. About 20 or 30 years ago, a notorious judge, but brilliant, named Aharon Barak passed this law where instead of the lawsuits going through the proper legal system before they arrive at the Supreme Court, and only the most important ones arrive at the Supreme Court for them to decide on. He basically decided that the Supreme Court should be able, that they're in charge of keeping the rights of the people, and therefore they very much care for human rights, surprise, human rights, and therefore what they have to do is get involved in anything that they see is incorrect or wrong in the country, even if there was no lawsuit and it never arrived at the Supreme Court. Anything that they disagree with, any law that they dislike, any politician's decision they don't agree with, they will just decide that it's illegal. So seeing this video from the Babylon Bee may seem a little absurd in the United States, but this is happening around the world and it is very scary. So bringing attention to it is very important.
And the most likely trigger to have them write this up and put this together is what's been going on here with the deportations.
Exactly.
So we have a district court judge who essentially has been using the powers he believes he has to essentially stop the president of the United States from using the powers that he has. And of course, we know there's different and co-equal branches of government. The president decided to make use of the 1798 Alien Enemies Act. And the position is that the country is being invaded and that we have terrorists and gang members coming in and the country is not safe. And the president was using these powers to do what presidents do and made the decision that he made, and now ultimately was being stopped by a district court judge, which, again, the counter argument to that is the district court judge does not have the authority or shouldn't have the authority to interfere with the actions of the president and the authority that the president has. That's really, I think, an interesting sort of discussion. There are people that'll argue the other way, but you gave a perfect example as to what happens when power, even within the judicial branch, goes unchecked. And you can have people that think that they can then, or maybe in fact, in some countries, will go and take over much of the control of the country simply by sitting on the bench and saying that they are entitled to it, much like this judge in the skit decided that there was a new constitutional amendment and that he was going to now become president. So on that note, we're glad that's not happening here right now. And again, humor, of course, is the best medicine. So I think it's a good way to end off.
Yep. Please let us know what you think down in the comments below. And we'll see you in the next episode. Thank you, Joe.
Yep, sounds good. See y'all again soon.
Have a great week.